Welcome to Let Me Know How It Is, a podcast about all things geek. This is the third in our Spotlight series where we focus on a specific show, movie, or creator. For today's episode, we focus on comic book writer and illustrator extraordinaire Darwyn Cooke. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. I'm really excited to do this one. Darwyn Cooke is a creator that I think means an awful lot to all of us here. He's come up virtually in every episode we've done of this show, so tonight we take a look back at his career. I'm Zach Slater.
I'm Frank Melman.
I'm Tommy Smithereens.
I'm Clifton.
Okay, so this one pretty much needed no preparation, but it was a lot of fun doing preparation for this one. Going back over his work over the years. So for those who don't know, Darwyn Cooke was a comic creator who was born November 16th, 1962 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. His first published comic book came in New Talent Showcase number 19 at DC in the mid-80s. And try as he did, he just couldn't find a place in the industry. So when he felt that making a living in the comic book industry was economically unfeasible, he started working as an art director and graphic designer and didn't return to comics until later. His first pit stop, though, would be in animation, where he worked as a storyboard artist with Bruce Timm and ultimately became an episode director on Men in Black, the animated series. DC Comics art director Mark Chiarello discovered an old proposal from Cooke for a Batman story and hired him to produce what became Batman Ego in 2000, and thus allowing Cooke to make his permanent transition to comics, where the rest is history. In 2006, his love letter to the DC Silver Age, DC The New Frontier, was released and has since become a seminal run in the industry. Warner Brothers and DC adapted it into an animated movie in 2009, where Cooke himself had some involvement with the project. Also in 2009, IDW released the first of 4 adaptations Cooke would create based on Richard Stark's acclaimed Parker novels, which earned him several awards. Over his career, Cooke won a total of 13 Eisner Awards, 8 Harvey Awards, and 5 Joe Shuster Awards. Cooke passed away from cancer in May of 2016. So let's jump right into his comic career, and we'll come back to his animation work later.
I was reading somewhere at one point that his style, or what inspired his style, was he traced over Kirby artwork.
Interesting. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, according to one article I saw online, I think I'll have to forward it to you guys, in which he incessantly, anything he could pick up from Kirby, he traced it as much as he could to develop his own stuff. Of course, the style differs greatly, but you can see it reminiscent in his action sequences and things of that nature. That same energy that Kirby had to it, in which, you know, he could emphasize an action detail, is felt through Darwyn's as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely see the influence there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I always figured that Kirby was a big influence on him, but I didn't know that that was one of the ways he kind of taught himself. Also, that's interesting. How did everybody first become aware of Darwyn Cooke?
Actually, my first introduction to Darwyn was The New Frontier.
Okay.
I know he did other stuff before, but I noticed his art style before from other books, if I can remember. But the one that really caught my eye was New Frontier.
I mean, was there any, Tommy, was there like any notoriety about the book when you found it, or was it just something cool on the rack that you picked up?
Well, it was something cool on the rack, but it sort of like saw aspects of DC characters that I didn't know existed, like challenges of the unknown at that time I wasn't really aware of, or it wasn't quite knowable. I thought it was a similar Fantastic Four rip. Little did I know
Interesting.
was not the case at all, but that's what pulled me into it. Of course, when you go into a comic book store, you know, there's a lot of aficionados that want you to check out certain things, and that was one of the things they suggested. I was more of a Marvel fan at the time that they suggested it.
Gotcha. Frank, Clifton, how about you guys? What was the first thing you read of his, or how did you find out about him first?
I think it was, for me, it was, I think I saw his stuff and likened it to Bruce Timm's, or, you know, of that similar kind of style. And then I remember finding out, like, on Batman Beyond, he did the credits for that, right? He did the opener.
Yeah, that's kind of one of his big animation pieces. He was the one that animated the opening for Batman Beyond. And the thing I'd heard is like that like kind of Matrix like turnaround was like done on his Lazy Susan. He had
Okay.
like an art model, like one of those figurines on a Lazy Susan.
I got the opportunity to ask him about it. He did confirm that was true. He did.
Very
He
cool.
did film that himself on a Lazy Susan in his kitchen.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of astonishing that most people do comics and hope to get into animation. I feel it's very astonishing that he found the opportunity to be animation, then go to comics what he originally wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah, very true.
Yeah, I think that's amazing in itself. And the fact that he did, if not designed the intro to Batman Beyond. Yeah, to me that's amazing because if you just look at the sequence alone, it basically shots of comic book, almost like a flip book page to an extent of how the different scenes of what he does. Very stylish in its own regard. I've never seen an intro like that for most cartoons, if anything.
There's stuff in that intro too that's so him that it's one of those things that I don't think you would pick out that it's him necessarily if nobody told you about it. But after you know it's him, you're like, oh, like that close up picture of that, like you know the girl that's like screaming and her hands like up on. I'm like that. God, I'm like that's yeah. I'm like that's a Darwyn Cooke image.
That's what I was gonna say. It's like, oh yeah, that's fully Darwyn right there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just the color washes over the like the dance scenes.
Yeah, especially what you're saying with mood. I agree, but it's just nice to see that prior to all the comic book stuff. You know, it's just crazy how you can see the beginnings of what he tried to accomplish in comics in such a in animation.
Yeah.
I don't remember the Men in Black episodes that he directed. I could have very well seen him because I do remember watching the show when it was on. It's not a very easy show to track down now, so it wasn't one of those that I could find very easily to rewatch for this show. But I was curious to see what he would do in that medium as a director.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
some episodes are free to watch on Sony Crackle app, but I don't know
what
if
is
they're
that?
his episodes.
Yeah.
That's like the only place I know that has them.
Do I need an antenna for that? How does that? How do I get that?
You can load it on your smart enabled TV.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Maybe.
I thought that meant you go to the Sony offices, knock on the door, and crackles the password to get in, and then somebody there will show them to you.
Like a speakeasy.
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much. But no, I remember Men in Black. I thought it was nice how the look of it. I'm trying to think of another cartoon that reminded what they pulled from it, but I like the style how it looked. It was just I didn't care for the stories as much, but I definitely loved the look of Men in Black.
Yeah, no, I mean that was another one. I was really shocked to hear that he even worked on it because when I first heard of him, there was such a close Bruce Timm connection.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see the Bruce Timm connection, like even in his art, especially like in Ego early on and everything like that. And I was really surprised when I heard that he went to Men in Black. But yeah, no, like I said, I haven't seen that stuff in years, but I remember liking the show. I remember liking it very much. I thought it was a better show than it had any right to be.
Right.
Really, because I mean, a lot of times, like those cartoons that come from movies are not always the greatest, but I thought that one was very, very strong, in my opinion. But
I found it weird that Men in Black was a comic book made into a movie, and then the cartoon ripped the movie as opposed to not even acknowledge the comic book.
Yeah. I remember. Nobody even knew it was a comic book, really, unless you were deep in the comic book world.
Yeah, it was published by Malibu.
Yeah.
Wow.
But anyway, so. Yeah, no, mine was I first found out about him because of Batman Ego, and yeah, like Frank, I heard the same thing. I saw it advertised in a Wizard magazine, and there was in the article like really strongly referenced like a connection between like him and Bruce Timm, and then like what little bit of preview art I saw of it, there seemed to be like a really strong similarity there, at least at that time. And at that time, like still like Bruce Timm is still like one of my favorite creators of all time. And so I just went like all in, and then, the rest is history for me there. I was hooked after Ego for sure.
Yeah. I picked up Ego off the stands too. And I thought it was one of those things where it was a really interesting take on Batman. And then the fact that it was so similar to the stuff from the animated series, I think is what brought me in as well.
For me, it was New Frontier, like Tommy, and it was the cover specifically that I remember seeing on the rack, and I think it was, I can't remember for sure which cover it was. It was either number 2, which is the Flash cover, or number 6, which is the Green Lantern cover. But it was just the design style of those covers jumped out from everything else that was on the rack at the time, and then made me want to pick it up, flip through it, and then saw that the art inside was just as good as the covers.
Yeah, those covers definitely evoke a lot of Silver Age, homage stuff, as well at the same time, kind of like 60s.
Yeah, like a mid-century modern art style.
Yeah, exactly. That was the kind of thing that jumped out at me when I remember when those books came out, and then they're just chock full of, as Tommy was saying, they're chock full of such good reference material on the rest of the DCU, while still being rooted in the 60s of lifestyle and the way things are handled, and it's just it's such a good piece overall, and he does such a good job of making you feel like it's, even though it doesn't exist from that time, that it could have existed from that time.
Right.
Yeah. I came into New Frontier a little later because I did read Ego first. That was my first introduction to him. But I kind of took a little bit of time away for a little while, and then I picked up Selina's Big Score was the next thing of his that I read from him, and that was, I think his style really coalesced into what his style would be in the future, really on that book. And I remember just thumbing through, I think I read Selina's Big Score in the car ride from the comic book store, because somebody else, I was on a vacation and somebody drove us to a comic store, and I was like, oh, this looks cool. And I was like, oh, it's the guy that did Batman Ego. I remember liking that. And then I'm just thumbing through it, and I think I read it in the car trip back. And just absolutely loved it. Did you guys encounter that book at all, when it was coming out, or did you find that later after his name sort of became bigger?
For me, it was like I said, I had read Batman Ego as well, and then I read his Catwoman stuff, the stuff that he did with Ed Brubaker
and Cameron Stewart,
right? But where they do they basically do the big kind of character revamp and change her look a bit to now, which is more like, it's hard to believe that she wasn't, it's so, I guess it's one of those things where it's definitely a moment in her character's, progression or evolution, where you look at her costume now and you're like, oh, well, that's been her costume forever. In some ways, I feel like, well, that's how she's looked for years and years and years. And that's from the early 2000s, that book?
Yeah.
I think.
I'm going to have my dates wrong. I want to say it's either 2001 or it's 2004.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one it is.
I think it's 2001, but it's one of those things where when I think back about Darwyn, I think the most thing, for me, it's such an indelible mark on that character. Again, we did the Spotlight episode or the episode about the 80th anniversaries. We talked about Catwoman and the fact that, she's been through so many costumes, but that one just seems to have stuck, for so long now. And they don't really depict her outside of that costume. That's pretty much what she looks like in most of her appearances.
Yeah, I think even recently DC's kind of I think remodeled her very recently within the last 2 years or so. And the funny thing that I'm noticing now is that costume that Cooke designed had stuck around for so long, but now it's being referenced in other costumes that people are doing on it. I remember also when Dark Knight Rises did Catwoman, they did a take on the goggles, which is sort of the big takeaway from his design.
Right.
His Catwoman did start in fall of 2001.
Okay.
Issue 1 was Brubaker writing, Darwyn Cooke pencils, and Mike Allred on inks.
There you go.
Selina's Big Score came out, I believe, July 2002 with the cover date of September 2002. Yeah. So it was, I guess, fall of 2002 is when it debuted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was for me, I remember, because I was reading Catwoman at the time, and like I said, other than the fact that, he changed her look and updated her, the way she was, her costume and everything. The other thing that was great about that book was just the reintroduction or the reinfusion of Slam Bradley into the DCU.
Sure, yeah.
That was a huge thing where it was basically and again, that's one of those things was kind of rooted in the time that he, when you think about New Frontier and stuff, it's kind of a throwback. I mean, granted, Slam Badly's been around since long before the '60s, but it was one of those things where you're thinking of like a Mike Hammer or Philip Marlowe kind of hard-edged detective type. The fact that they would go back to bringing out Slam was really cool, and as a supporting character in that book, he was awesome. And I don't think anyone's really used him as well or as much since as he was in that book.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And he plays a big part in Selina's Big Score also, which yeah, like I forget that because it's done kind of like a prequel of sorts to the Catwoman run, but I forget that it came out afterward a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I love about that book too is we should probably give a shout out to Dave Stewart, his colorist, a lot. Also, he was a frequent collaborator of his, and I just think like there's something about his books where just thumbing through them, I think like the color strikes me so much more. It's kind of like if you've ever watched like a Steven Soderbergh movie where he does a lot with like color filters on the camera, where like scenes kind of have like this sepia tone. Like Traffic is a really good example of this, where like all the scenes with Michael Douglas's character all kind of have like this blue desaturated look, and then the Benicio del Toro stuff has like a sepia, like warm yellowish tone to it and everything like that. And I get the feel from his books that way. And I imagine it has to be something that they've talked about, right? Like I imagine it's got to be a conversation between the two of them. Like, this is kind of my set, because what's also cool about Selina's Big Score for me is that Gotham feels like a real place there because it's intermingled with like other actual locations. Like, it doesn't just take place in Gotham. We see Morocco, we see Vegas, we see Miami Beach, and every one of those locations kind of has like a different color palette, like a different feel to it,
Right. Well, I mean, it's like I said, for me, the biggest thing about it was it's kind of like, it's the closest thing we get to like kind of a really cool. I mean, granted, it's a much more expanded story, but the fact that it's the closest thing you get to like a Catwoman annual, really,
right?
But it's so good, and I'm glad the fact that it's not just self-contained in like a couple issues or 48 or 60. It's a huge. It's a great thing that he did that story. I love Selina's Big Score. It's one of those things where when getting him to sign it, and talking to him about it was really cool. The fact that just being able to tell him to his face, it was a really great book and a really great piece of work that he had done.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about it too is that he had, even though it's one book, it came out as one book, right? It didn't have issues. But he separates the book as like book 1, book 2, book 3. And I thought also what's really neat about that is he'll devote like a panel to like a chapter shift or something like that, like a full panel in there. And it's not like typically when I would see an actual creator make reference to a chapter change in a book, it's always been on like the outer edges of the page somewhere. And this, I liked that it felt like in a movie when you cut to like a full screen graphic, like a Tarantino thing. I'm thinking, and I just thought like it was just so interesting to me that he told the story that way. Like, there's a sense of pacing in his books that I don't get in a lot of other creators' work. Does that make sense?
Right. Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you sort of get the feeling that he is able to capture mood so greatly and bring a sort of sound to it, if that makes any sense. Like you can hear what's stirring or what's being quietly done just based upon how he presents the panel, or even how he identifies characters' eyes. What I love about him is the squint. Like, whenever somebody's thinking or up to something, the brow would be heavy, regardless if it's a man or woman.
Right.
He gets that sort of steely-eyed gaze sometimes if he needed to, or even wide-eyed one if someone was innocent.
Yeah.
But what I also like too is how he would balance his seriousness and his cartooniness. Does that make you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And his stuff had like a real edge to it too. Like, typically, not everything, because I mean he did have like a fun, like, all ages side of him that he did too. But there was. He seemed to be like really into like crime fiction and stuff like that, and everything kind of had like a crime seedy underbelly tone to it. Which I mean, we got to talk about Stark. if we're talking Selina's big score, because man, I think that is such an underused character, in my opinion. I didn't know what he was a reference to, until later we saw where Cooke's career, what he would do with his career later. I just thought he was a reference to Lee Marvin, which is right. He is a reference to Lee Marvin, but
not just.
I didn't realize that he was a reference to the Parker character, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
Because I didn't know who Richard Stark was or anything like that. I just I didn't know that he was homaging him with that. I just figured he picked a cool name at that point.
Right.
But I mean, the what am I trying to say? The ingredients of what we would see in his Parker books later, I think, is absolutely there with Stark. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I definitely think it's one of those things where it's kind of it almost seems like he wanted to write the Parker novel stuff before he got to writing Parker, right?
Yeah, seems like that.
Or it was one of those things where when you see someone bring in something from another, genre or, another, archetype from another book and put it in the book that they love, that they're working on. That's what looking back, that's what I took it as, is definitely he had a moment of, I'd like to bring this character into this world because I would think that Catwoman and the people that she runs with would inhabit this world, and this guy would fit in great. It's almost one of the things where I didn't get a chance to look at I flipped through a lot of the Parker stuff, but I didn't get a chance to read it, and it's one of the things where I almost want to do a deep dive and see if Selina's somewhere in the background. You know what I mean? That to me that wouldn't surprise me, because that was the thing about with New Frontier. It was really cool about you see the stuff in the background of the Trigger twins or
right.
is that the one I'm thinking of that was in the show on the black and white sets? I think it's the Trigger twins or somebody, one of the old DC Western heroes. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Right. We'll get to New Frontier in a second. Just for me though, for Stark, what I think, it's funny to me because he's such a necessary character. Looking back, right? Mm-hmm. Typically, the only real mentor figure that we've seen Selina ever have is Wildcat, right? Ted Grant, right?
Yeah, generally, yeah.
But we don't ever really see the person that kind of taught her the ways about being a thief.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I guess all of it was just sort of she was self-taught. She figured it out on the streets or whatever, everything.
Right.
But it was so cool that he's part, romantic foil for her, but he's also part, mentor character for her, which I thought was really, really, really cool. And I remember, not that I really watched a ton of the show. I mean, so they could have very well used him and I wouldn't know about it. But, if I was in the writer's room for Gotham, the show, I would definitely be like, no, Stark. We got to put Stark in here somewhere.
Yeah, I don't think they ever got, I think it was totally Bruce Wayne-ish
right
stuff. I don't think they ever really got around to anything and I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think they did anything along those lines where her character did a deep dive into what she was about, I don't think.
Right.
Going back to thinking about Darwyn Cooke having an interest in Stark or Parker long before he did the Parker books, I am going to bring up the showcase short that he did in his 1985, his debut in comics.
Okay.
Which ran in Talent Showcase number 19, August 1985 from DC Comics. It's a 5-page short called The Private Eye.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a 5-page detective story, no dialogue, which is very interesting about it. All pictures, all panels.
Okay.
And at least in the first page, the kind of a splash page, title page to it, I can definitely look at it and see the seeds of what became the Parker books.
Okay.
It's got a similar aesthetic and I can just look at that and see okay, this is the earliest iteration of what became that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it was from 1985.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, his art style would come around drastically, I would say. They look almost like two completely different artists at that point.
Right, except the design sense. The design sense is the same.
The design sense is the same. And really, though, I would say the real tell that it's him is also the sense of pacing. I think of it like I think his staging of action, his that being a strength of his, I think was present even back then. I think, and we'll post a website that has the entire Showcase 19 short story of his on the website, so you guys can take a look at that if you haven't read it at all, because it's very cool. It's very interesting to see what sort of his first published work was, and if how great of a masterful creator he would become later on. It's really interesting to see the journey from his first piece.
The funny thing is, I don't own that issue. I don't have it. The one time I came across it, I can't remember, Zach. Do you remember what happened to that issue?
I do remember. You found it at a convention, and you were like, "Hey, you should read this."
Yes, I gave it to you.
Yeah. It was on my dresser at my parents' house. No, I do remember that.
Yeah, I found that's the only one I've ever found out in the wild of like an actual show is where I found that one. I think I was in Heroes in North Carolina, I think, and found that issue. It was like, hey, I found this early Darwyn Cooke piece. Should I pick it up for you? Or did I just pick it up for you and give it to you? I can't remember which.
No. You didn't. I didn't know it was coming. You just showed up with it. We just went out to dinner one day. He's like, I got something for you. I found something for you. And he's like,
oh, yeah.
And you were like, here we go. This is Darwyn Cooke's first work. And I was like, yes. Oh, wow. Like, yeah. And I never even heard of it because.
Yeah. I hadn't either. It was one of the things where I just flipped through and I'm like, Darwyn Cooke? Wow. So, yeah, I don't own the issue. So this is kind of, new, but not new to me. I knew it existed. I just haven't read it. So, but I can definitely see what you're talking about there, Clifton, about the fact that in the pacing and the storytelling, very much so. There's also the suspense created by the eye in it. Yeah, you can definitely see. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating to look back at.
All right, let's steer to New Frontier. Let's do the big one. So, Tommy and Clifton, this is your guys' first foray into Darwyn Cooke. So like, what went through your head when you were reading this? I'm curious. Because I very much knew who he was when I came across this. He was already big when I read New Frontier.
No, it just felt like it felt to me like a omnibus telling. Like it just seemed like, remember those old comics in which they told the history of DC, or maybe even the history of Marvel, in which it was more words than pictures.
Mm-hmm. This
felt more immersive, like it was an honest story as opposed to chronicling certain things. Like I loved his approach to the Manhunter.
Sure.
That's what really brought me in, because I didn't really know his history. I came onto the Martian Manhunter through Justice League, the Maguire
the Mateus,
thank you, approach, in which he ate Oreos, he hung out a bit, he had an aversion to fire, but that was his weakness. But to show how he came to Earth and the span of how he was ingrained into the DC universe felt very intriguing. It answered questions without really bringing up more questions. That's what I felt about it, and it gave it a interesting timeline to the DC universe and how certain people became those bigger heroes as opposed to. And what I liked about it too was it didn't beat you over the head with Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman. Not to say they weren't in it, but usually it's seen through their eyes. And this is a great take in which they're there. They're very much as powerful as they need to be, but it was never overly done. That's what I liked about it, especially the scene when Wonder Woman in Vietnam. I never thought about her in that way.
Right. When she's in French Indochina. Yeah.
Exactly. And then how they talk to Superman in that regard, where like they're comrades, but it's like they have their differences, they have their viewpoints.
And she's taller than him too, which is another, like, a lot of people had a real problem with that. I remember hearing that in interviews with him. He was like, a lot of fans hated the fact that he drew Wonder Woman to be bigger than Superman. But he's like, she's an Amazon, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally.
I did just see a couple of people online debating or questioning whether or not that was the first instance where we ever see Wonder Woman in the like leather pleated skirt straps, like the kind of warrior outfit.
Right.
And like from their reckoning was everyone was thinking that is the first time we ever saw that. And it's been used, countless times since. And it's a great design. It's a great look. And it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things where it's amazingly it's amazing that no one ever thought I mean you obviously have her in the golden age wearing the skirt, and that no one ever thought to do it that simple tweak to it.
Right.
It's so simple but so elegant, and like you said, it makes such good sense.
And arguably historical.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, what I love about his take on her is the fact that she has no problem. Usually we get Diana, and Diana's so often, yeah, she kicks ass, but she has to be the ambassador, so therefore she's super, almost docile in some scenes. And in this, she gets right in Superman's face and tells him, "There's the door, dude. Go."
Yep. There's the door, spaceman.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't need you to think it's okay what I think or what I say. And I think that's a wonderful take on Wonder Woman that we don't get nearly enough.
Yeah. There's so much to like about this book, but I want to give a shout out to Justice League Unlimited for me, because that was a really important companion piece for me when reading New Frontier. Because I've always said Justice League Unlimited was like my gateway drug to the DC universe, bigger, right? I was a Batman, Superman fan, but Justice League Unlimited made me a fan of like the Atom, made me a fan of Hawkman, made me right. Like right. I knew who King Faraday was because of Justice League Unlimited, and so I think I would have been really lost reading New Frontier had I not watched that show first. And the funny thing is that like it took me a couple of years and a couple of reads of New Frontier for me to get everything right. Even the first time, and I had been watching the show, and I kind of knew I would say more about DC than your average person. There was still a lot that fell through the cracks. There was a lot of like Challengers of the Unknown stuff that I didn't know, and there was a lot of like Viking Prince, because I don't think maybe I hadn't seen the Justice League episode where they do a nod to the Viking Prince in there. There's just a lot of like cool stuff in there that like when I would read it the second time and I would learn more about the comics history in DC Silver Age. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I know what Dinosaur Island is, and I know what the Losers are. And,
Right.
Which, speaking of the Losers, my God, how great is that opening?
We've talked about it before, and it's one of those, it's amazing to me that, again, even if you're not really a fan of those war comics or you don't really enjoy, like, to me, it's all, it's all Joe Kubert stuff or bust basically for the most of that stuff. But even if you don't really like Sergeant Rock or the Losers or whatever, the amount of like tension and drama he manages to wring out of those characters, and only for them to be in it for as short as they are in that story. And then that amazing ending with Johnny Cloud and Navo Ace, doing that swan dive is, that to me is one of those, like, again, when we talk about the animated New Frontier, it's such a sad thing that they didn't get to animate that.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I love the animated New Frontier. I mean, it's a remarkably hard story to adapt because it's not like a big central A plot that's from beginning to end, right? It has all these tangents, right? And it reads a lot more like a big sprawling novel, I think. But yeah, no, I would have killed to have seen that Losers Open animated for it.
Well, it's one of those things where I think if they had if they had made it later in the catalog and they were allowed it, we've talked about it before, and you and I, Zach, about the fact that it's one of those that they definitely should have, DC, should have allowed, Warner Brothers should have allowed that to be 2, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he does, one of the things I love about New Frontier, and just flipping through it again, was, page to page and chapter to chapter, there's just so much stuff. Like you said, you don't get it all the first time. It's so packed with stuff that you may, even if you're a casual DC fan, you may not know a lot of it. But, as someone I've read, for me, it was like, oh, that's cool. That's the Losers. It's so cool. There's Challengers of the Unknown. Oh, there's, all this really great stuff that's in it. You may not get it from the fact that I think it's kind of hard to take it all in. And it's one of those things where definitely, if that story had more room to breathe in animation, I think it would have been even better.
Yeah. No, we've definitely talked about that, how Death of Superman was the first animated movie they did, and New Frontier was the second one. But this, like, last year they did Death of Superman again, like as a 2-part movie, and we were like, can they do another shot at New Frontier and do a 2-parter, please?
Right.
Like, yeah,
absolutely. That's one I'd love to see them do again.
No,
in a
one of the
format.
other things that, like, I mean, it is kind of, I mean, I get because it's a 70-minute movie and you got to cut a lot of stuff. And the way that they get the John Henry stuff is kind of an elegant, like, quick little nod to it, which I think is cool. Like, I think it's neat that they tried their hardest to get some reference to it in there. But again, like, had it been animated, like, I think that John Henry stuff is just so cool to look at. Like how I like that he had the discipline to not introduce characters that didn't exist in DC's Silver Age. Like, I think the way I heard him speak about it, maybe one of the special features of New Frontier, is that, like, he looked at actual American history and looked at DC's publication history and saw that there were, like, strange connections. And so you could almost overlay DC's publication history over world history, and you could see that there was a lot of congruency to it. And I think that's kind of like the big through line of the book. But he was saying, like, I can't make a promise to talk about things that were happening in the world and not do civil rights. But he was like, at the time, like, what character am I going to use?
Oh, sure, absolutely. There's not really. That's the thing about DC at the time, obviously, is the fact that there's not really. They didn't have that character. That character didn't exist. In publication, there was no one that he could chose. For that role, because it just was not one of those things where they marketed or tried to come up with a character that was diverse. Everybody was was white basically at that time. There just wasn't that push for people of color to be in books at the time. But that's another thing that I love about that book is the idea that he creates this character that out of whole cloth for it, and you feel you're able to feel his whole story within the pages of New Frontier.
Yeah, and it's just such an elegant creation that he does kind of have like a sort of steel kind of reference, but he's not using steel. But it's elegant that he's using like the John Henry, what do I call it? I guess like folk song as sort of like his anchor for that. But what's cool about that is that steel in the future is named John Henry Iron. So it's like it's just this beautiful like symmetry. With it, like
Now, one of the things I think I always thought to me even now when I look at New Frontier, as much as I do, I do love it. I think it's an important piece, important work. One of the things I always think about is the fact that when you look at, all those characters in the 60s when they're first appearing, it almost is you can almost feel the if you ever looked at like the first appearance of Barry Allen or the first appearance of Hal Jordan in Showcase, in the Showcase Presents, you almost feel like New Frontier is a story that's happening around those issues, kind of like Untold Tales of Spider-Man is, right?
Okay.
Kind of like, it's we're getting sections of those stories put into New Frontier, and then there's this bigger story around it that eventually, not to ruin the ending of New Frontier, leads into Brave and the Bold 28, which is the first appearance of the Justice League.
Right. Yeah.
He's sort of weaving these pieces, into, and again, the fact that it's so much of Americana and so much of American history in there as well. It's amazing how well he puts that all together, and again manages to get so much into that story.
Yeah, and he even like piggybacking off what he said, not to spoil it, but like after the center is destroyed, he I remember seeing an interview where he said that he drew kind of like a star-shaped piece of debris from the center. And then, so he was kind of postulating like, is this Starro? Is Starro part of the center? Like, I don't like, I just think he was throwing it out there in case anybody wanted to make that connection. It's there. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it is absolutely leading up to that book for sure. Which is something I don't think about that much for that book. But yeah, I think it's true. Like, you do see other things happening around it.
Right. The other thing I think about that when I look at or have looked at or reread New Frontier, and this one's Tommy, I'd like your opinion on this, because I don't know if Zach or Clifton have read it, but in a lot of ways I feel like it's the kind of and because there at one point at DC, I'm getting in a roundabout way. At one point at DC, when Robinson had done Golden Age, right?
Yeah.
There was talk of him going. If you're not familiar with Golden Age, it deals with all the World War II heroes, all the Justice Society, and some of like the lesser known characters like John Law, who was the Tarantula, and who else is in that? Manhunter, right? Paul Kirk.
I believe so. I'm trying to think.
But do you remember how the epilogue, without spoil, if you've never read it, it's well worth picking up. James Robinson, and I have to look up who did the art on it. But if you've never read it, it's well worth picking up because it's a great story. But it's one of those things where it ends with the tease of the Silver Age, right? The idea of what's coming next.
Yes.
And in some ways, I think of Robinson had this idea. I think, if I remember correctly, I remember in an interview somewhere in Wizard that he had talked about wanting to do Silver Age at DC, but it never came to fruition. And instead, we got this, which is, obviously, it doesn't line up because it's an Elseworld story. But in some ways, I feel like the feeling of that they captured in Golden Age, they managed to pass on. And Darwyn does a really good job of encapsulating the Silver Age in this one series.
Okay. Well, yeah, Robinson illustrated by Paul Smith, right?
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I need to make a correction really quick, too, because I saw Dave Stewart was his colorist on New Frontier, but Matt Hollinsworth was his colorist on Selena's Big Score. I was just thumbing through that stuff right here. So I just want to make that correction really quick. Okay. So, sorry.
No, but you're right, Frank. Robinson had wanted to do a sequel, but he wanted to have Shaken, Howard Shaken.
Okay.
Do that. It was supposed to be a 4-issue mini. Oh, no, excuse me. The Golden Age was a 4-issue miniseries, but his follow-up was supposed to be the Silver Age, which was going to introduce us to Johnny Quick, Starman, Hourman, and the original Green Lantern, among others, in the McCarthy era.
Okay.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. It was a setup for the next one, but yeah, unfortunately, we never got that.
No, we don't get it.
Yeah, but no, Golden Age was a great book. I recommend that to anybody who gets the opportunity to read that.
I wish we got a sequel to New Frontier. I don't know that he had any interest in doing it, but for sure.
We get the one shot that gives some background on some stuff we see in it, right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. So when the movie came out, when the animated movie came out, he revisited it and he did sort of he did like a lost chapter in there that talked about the Batman Superman fight that's kind of hinted at in the book, but you don't really get to see.
Right.
So you see that one, and he had some collaborators on that as well, like Dave Bullock. I think did the art for like the Robin. I think it's a Kid Flash book story in there. It's been a long time since I've read that one, but Dave Bullock, who was the director of the movie, I think did the art for that story as well. Yeah. The thing I'm finding with New Frontier is I read it now almost like a magazine. Like I've read the story so many times, but I pick up the book and I just kind of thumb through it and I'm just like, oh, I really like this scene, so I'm going to read the loser stuff. And then it's like, oh, but no, that scene where Hal meets Chuck Yeager, I really, really love that scene too, so I'm going to read that, And then it's like, oh no, but I'm going to read the fight between Wildcat and Cassius Clay. Because I think that's great. I think the panel structure of that is really, really cool. To do like an exciting boxing fight in a comic book is really cool. It's really well done. And since I brought up Hal, I will say this, Tommy, I'm sorry if it's going to make you groan, but I think this may be my favorite version of Hal Jordan, maybe in anything.
No, I'm fine with Hal in his era.
Yeah.
Hal in his era is great. I just don't like Hal after Kyle. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but I agree with you. It's a great Hal Jordan story, or at least his depiction of him, and it captures him very well as to what I envision the character would be as far as characterization goes. But you're not insulting me unless you're talking about post Kyle Hal Jordan.
Yeah, no, I think Hal is probably the closest to what you could call a protagonist in this story, but there's large like swaths of the story where he's not in it.
That's what makes it good.
Right.
Also.
But that's why I say it's so much of it is, with the exception of like the Hawks, like there's not really a lot of Hawkman stuff in it, is there? I don't remember it being.
I don't recall. I have to look at it again, but that's what makes it good.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying the fact that like it's definitely, for me, it's always the idea of like, well, showcase number 4 is Barry, and like showcase number 22, showcase presents 22 is Hal, And like that's why when I read it, that's the other thing I feel weird about it, or not weird, but just kind of like, huh. When I look at it, is just the idea that he doesn't start his beginning where people argue where exactly the Silver Age begins, whether it's with the first appearance of Barry or with the Martian Manhunter. I've heard that idea too.
Uh-huh.
That those early detective comics is where his first appearance is. That's where the Silver Age really starts.
Mm.
But it's one of those things where in this, it's really Hal's kind of like your entryway character, wouldn't you say?
And would you over the Flash? Because to me, isn't the Flash already established? Now, mind you, I love his characterization of Barry.
Right.
His love of Iris, it captured that greatly, and then his confidence when he's the Flash.
Right.
He could do no wrong. I love that. But I thought that Barry was already established at that point into the story with Hal.
From what I mean is, I'm just saying it's one of those things where the take is basically your entryway into becoming a superhero is definitely Hal, right?
Yeah,
because he's basically like and even like the idea that he's the one that's going through this big transformation throughout this story. Everyone else has kind of either gotten their powers or been established for a while.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Flash, like Barry gets his powers recently in the story, but you see it kind of in the background. It's not a scene that you see played out like you see Hal becoming Green Lantern in this.
Right.
It's really more in what I'll call like the air quote like mixed media style pages, because that's another like really cool thing he did with this book, where it's like there's some pages that there's beautiful splash pages in this for sure. But there's also pages in there that are like magazine articles and newspaper articles and TV newsreels. And there's like a movie newsreel when Martian Manhunter is watching, and that's how we get the introduction of Challengers of the Unknown as the team. But their origin, the Challengers of the Unknown origin, is also one of those like I said, reading it like a magazine. I get stuck on those pages every time.
Yeah.
Every time when they go back to the scene of the plane crash and then just all happen to be there that same night.
Yep.
And then Rocky's like at the end of it, like, you guys want to go grab a beer? And then it's a beautiful. My goodness, I love New Frontier.
It's a great book.
Yeah. So great. Oh my God. The one character though that I have to think, so Sergeant Rock's in it for a panel. Which I've never heard him say this, but I imagine I imagine that he must have been a little heartbroken that he couldn't get Sergeant Rock in there more.
Sure.
Right. The only other character that I think is not in there is Jonah Hex. Right?
Yeah, because he gets Viking Prince.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He gets Viking Prince. We get the Suicide Squad. We get we said the Challengers a lot. I'm trying to think of some of the like C-list level stuff that we don't really hear too much about.
Right.
But no Jonah Hex. And really quick, also one of the other things I wanted to say too that I like that he what strikes me is Hal is kind of his through line to this, is that he has a way of writing characters that don't get along with each other, but has equal love for both characters.
Sure.
You know what I mean? They're like, cause Rick Flag doesn't get along with Hal at all. They're he looks at him as soft, and reckless, as is the common characterization with Hal. And Hal kind of looks at him as he's kind of nuts, and he's a flag waving, I think simpleton he calls him at one point. Maybe it's Ace that says that, but I love that his approach to those characters is, no, King Faraday's awesome. Right. And Rick Flag is awesome. And even though they're going to kind of crap on Hal in the story, Hal's awesome.
Sure.
I mean,
he definitely gives, a lot of the characters moments to shine. Definitely.
Yeah.
He definitely has. I mean, it's one of those things where in some cases it's kind of hard to argue about who you think might be his favorite, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. Who knows? Who's
the airplane fighters that DC depicts? I can't think of their names.
Which one? The enemy ace that you talking about?
No, not Enemy Ace. One with the black
Oh, the Blackhawks.
Oh,
the
Blackhawks.
Blackhawks. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, that's another. Good
They're in
bet.
there at the end, though.
Yeah, but the
Yeah.
fact
Yeah.
that I'm saying that they're in there, that he pulls them in as well.
Yeah. Oh my God, so great. Yeah, we get
Yeah.
the Atom and everything, not in costume, but we get the Atom. Atom's actually very important.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a quick nod to Adam Strange in there too.
Yeah. Just a
I
little
can't
bit.
remember if he's sort of like in that end melee.
No, I mean, there's a bit where he suits up and flies off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get Aquaman pretty quick, but he gets strong moments because, like what Tommy was saying, like Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman, like they're not in it a ton. They're not in it as much as you would expect for like a big sprawling like DC Universe Justice League thing. But I mean, that scene where Batman confronts Martian Manhunter in his apartment,
Oh yeah,
right? Oh man,
Mhm.
It's one of my favorite Batman scenes of all time.
it's a good one.
Yeah. But if I may, if you guys will indulge me for a second, because I'm a big Batman fan, though, I want, if I could bring up Solo really quick, because Darwyn Cooke did a fantastic issue of Solo.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank, you and I talk about this one a lot. One of the stories he did in there was a story called Deja Vu, which is essentially him retelling Night of the Hunter, which is a classic Batman story from Detective Comics where Batman doesn't utter a word. And it's one of those. You ever had a movie that was remade and for some reason you like the original and the remake equally as much, but you like them for completely different reasons? This is kind of the same thing happening with me on this. Like, I absolutely love both of those stories so much.
Yeah.
But a cool little tidbit there is Stark from Selina's Big Score and Chow are he's made two of the crooks that Batman chases after in that book, Stark and Chow from Selina's Big Score.
Yeah, that's the one where that's a story where Batman pops up out of the water, right?
Yeah, so in the original, there's like the guy that's trying to drown Batman in the pond.
So great.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's such a great. Another one, like the colors are so beautiful on that book.
Right.
And the bit where Batman's got the keys and they're trying to get away, as they've driven out to the woods and they're like, all right, let's hop in the car. The keys are gone. And then you just see the close up of Batman, dangling the keys.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fantastic panel. Oh, I love it. It's a great solo though. I mean, not just for that book. I mean, for that story. I mean, he's got, there's a New Frontier story in Solo, which I forget about too. There's a King Faraday story in there.
Right.
Yeah.
He also wrote one of the stories in Tim Sale's Solo.
Yes, he did. Story on that one, I believe I read because they did a collected edition called Ego and Other Tales. So DC did a hardcover where they had Ego and Selina's Big Score and a couple of his black and white Batman stories. And that Deja Vu story that I told you about from his solos in there, but the Tim Sale one from Tim Sale's Solo is in there as well. And Darwyn Cooke does the introduction in that book. And he says that he had written a Batman script with Catwoman that he intended to be a kind of short piece at the end of Selina's Big Score hardcover. And for whatever reason, they just cut it. It just never materialized and never came into it. And then years later, or I don't know how long later, but when Tim Sale was doing his solo, he approached Darwyn about do you want to do a Batman and Catwoman story with me? And then Darwyn was basically I have this story that I really, really like, but it never got made. So they did that one together. And they kind of did that one Marvel style, I believe he said. Yeah. That's a beautiful one too. Yeah. He did have a little bit of a career as a writer where he would give other guys things to do, because he would write Superman Confidential, which Tim Sale also did the art for that. You remember that one? It's traded as Superman Kryptonite, I believe.
Okay.
You remember that one? The one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I think it's one of the most underrated Superman stories out there.
Yeah.
It's essentially Frank, you can kind of spot me a little bit on this one, but it was a series of books coming out that was supposed to detail like the first in characters. It was kind of a prequel series, right?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, and so this story was detailing Superman's first run-in with kryptonite.
Yeah.
And I don't want to spoil it, but it has one of my favorite Superman endings of all time. It may have one of my favorite moments he's ever done in all of comics in that book. Also, so if you haven't read Superman Kryptonite, definitely pick that one up. It's a really, really good Superman story. Anyone else have anything in Solo they want to talk about, though? The Question, or what else is in there? I'm trying to think.
It's been a while since I've looked at that one.
Well, that's another one that also like has a really cool different art styles for every story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I like it how he blends it all into one ongoing story. Like he doesn't let up with one particular story. He makes a one page of it, which introduces it. That's one thing I like about it, because how Cook sets up his solo issue is apart from the other ones, which is just separate stories in itself. But him, he like blends different aspects of his work into one big telling. Like I love the subtle one where I want to say it may be his introduction to art or something like that, where the little kid goes to his grandparents' house and he ends up coming out with a thing of paints, but it's just a subtle story. No superhero, no espionage, no backstabbing, no nothing.
I remember that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah. It's like his dad takes him. It's like a story about him when he's a kid, and his dad takes him to like a friend of his dad's house.
Yes.
World's
And-
Window is the title.
Yeah, World's
Yeah.
Window. Yes.
Yeah, and they were they were trying, like, they were introducing him to golf. Was it golf or tennis? I can't remember.
Well, it came in as golf, but what it ended
Yeah.
up leaving is with art.
Yeah. He meets
His grandmother, I believe.
Yeah.
And then he just
and
takes
she's
to
a painter, and then he's like, I draw a little bit, and she's like, okay, and then and she gives him like a set of paints and stuff like that, and he runs upstairs immediately and starts doing it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's the other piece that he's in there, where it's like something out of a magazine, in which he has like a cartoon, a mazo being swallowed up by Chemo in a maze. It's called the
Yeah,
Funny Pages. I mean, he uses Angel and the Ape in one bit. He even shows how his depiction of comic books to kids, like from the 1920s to now, how
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's one of my favorite things in that book. Is that timeline of the history of comic books. And it's this tiny little thing across the bottom of that page. It's because it's like a kid's menu, table mat.
Yeah,
like the activity page where you have like the jumble and you got like the maze and stuff like that.
yeah.
And
then he has deep dives with like Acts of Scientists, and we have Dr. I think Magnus from the Metal Men. Is it the Metal?
Mhm.
Yeah, where he's asked a question, and then there's Professor Haley and June Robbins also. It's just a nice hodgepodge of everything DC. I mean, hell, he even have a down and out Joker and Harley Quinn tell him to shut up. And what's funny is the little subtleties in his jokes is on the Joker's shirt is I'm Rick James.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're in the drive-through.
Yes.
They're in the drive-through, and Joker's like looking through his burgers, like, I said no pickles. They put pickles in the
And but that he has like jokes like in just one panel.
Yeah.
Which they tell stories. And then he does pinups, of course, of Selena, excuse me. Yeah. No, I love his solo. It's just different from everybody else's because he blends comedy, he blends mystery. He brings, strong characters in like Batman, and then does his own thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like I said, the art is different for every one of the stories he did. Where like the New Frontier King Faraday one is kind of like wispy.
Yes.
And the Question one's got like kind of like distortion on top of it and everything, and it's Yeah, his solo's fantastic. Yeah, and I forgot, because he does have like that frame narrative in it where Slam Bradley is in the bar.
Yes.
And it kind of introduces every story.
Yes. Like he's telling the story to the people reading it. Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah.
Definitely a different take than everyone else's and how he delivers his book.
I'd have to look it up. I think that was one of the Eisner Awards he won was for that book.
Yeah,
was for that issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bring back Solo, DC. So great. We got to do a spotlight on Solo.
If
We really do.
If you go on Twitter, somebody brought that up a long time ago, and they were bombarded with a list of who's who artists that you're like, wow, they didn't do a solo for them too. And in the list, it's crazy what people submit as far as that's concerned.
He did have a period also, like, I mean, he did do art for other books also. He did do a couple of issues of Jonah Hex with Jimmy Palmiotti, which are great issues. I mean, the one I reread for this one was Jonah Hex number 33, which I don't know a ton of Jonah Hex. I don't read it. I have an affinity for the character. I really like him, but I haven't sat and read stacks and stacks of Jonah Hex comics. But what I thought was interesting about that story is it's again, there's kind of a Parker feel to it a little bit. There's some similarities with Jonah Hex and Parker, but it's like a snow setting. Like it's up in Canada and everything, and you don't really see Jonah Hex like in fur, you know, like shooting wolves out in the forest, you know.
Right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful looking book. I remember. I mean, it's an awesome story. I really like that issue, but I mean, it is a beautiful book that Jonah Hex won, and he did with Jeff Johns, one I mentioned in our very first episode. It was one of my favorite single issues, the Green Lantern Secret Files in Origin, 2005, the one with his dad taking him up in the airplane. Yeah,
that's a good one too.
It is, yeah, it's a fantastic one. Yeah, he had a lot of like kind of fun. Sort of like one note things that he did, and I know when New 52 started, he did. Was it a Shade issue with James Robinson?
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, with Vigilante as sort of like the lead character in that one. That was a really cool issue too.
Yeah.
Did anybody check out his Before Watchmen stuff?
I have them. I haven't had a chance to read them. What I always thought was interesting about that was at one point I remember reading an article early on with him, and it was around the time of the Ultimates, and he was kind of not down on it as a piece of work, but it was just the idea of, and he echoes it some in the. It's kind of like, I feel like we just shut up the story, but when we saw him give that talk at the Smithsonian at the art gallery, where he's kind of said, you know, he kind of gave the idea that in this interview that comics were for kids, or they were more targeted, or more, you know, they basically grew out of being an art form for children, right? And it's one of those things, and it's one of those things where I've seen him say it other places. So when he did Before Watchmen, I thought it was kind of an odd, you know, not that I would think he was allowed to do whatever he wanted to. He could, you know, he's an artist, so he's open to doing whatever he wanted to. And I would, you know, I never looked down on the situation. I just thought it was kind of something I didn't think he would ever be part of. But, you know, I do have the issues. I just haven't had a chance to read them yet.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat. I didn't necessarily object to the existence of any of that Before Watchmen stuff. I just didn't want to read any of it.
Right.
Right. And my motivation for that was that I didn't want anything to make me change. I didn't want anything to impact the way that I read Watchmen. Right. I didn't want something to be revealed in one of those Before Watchmen books that would make me look at a scene differently in Watchmen from something they revealed. So that's kind of why, like, it was the one time he did something that Darwyn did something that I didn't go to. And I remember when he passed away, I immediately went and bought Before Watchmen.
Right.
Right. Because it was like, well, like, this is probably like, you know, now the only thing that's kind of like a new thing from him that I'm going to be able to read. And I haven't gotten around to read it. I mean, I will read it someday, but I remember I just wanted it when he passed away. I just wanted to own it.
Right.
Right. And it was a great trade because it's Minutemen, which he wrote and drew, but it's also Silk Spectre, which he co-wrote with Amanda Conner, and Amanda Conner did the work. But you know, I've heard him in interviews say like that's really more like Amanda's book than it is his, but he's like a co-writer on it. And it's both of those miniseries together in one volume.
Right. Well, it's funny that we got. I didn't think. You know, it's one of the things I think I had a stray thought about is the Beyond the Before Watchmen stuff, and then didn't think about it until after I flipped through New Frontier. But if you watch the HBO Watchmen series, Tommy, wouldn't you say that a lot of that is influenced by the John Henry stuff in New Frontier?
Oh, definitely.
You can definitely see it, right?
Oh, definitely can see that. Not looking back at what you're saying, yeah, you can definitely see that.
That the idea that someone at some point went and put all that together in the context of Watchmen, that idea of an African American superhero and what that would have been like for them at that time. It's a huge portion of what the Watchmen HBO series was.
Yeah, that's probably what sparked Lindelof's idea of doing that, and why it stopped short of a second season, because it definitely heavily builds upon that notion of that. So no, I'd agree. It could have been what sparked it.
Watching the show, it is actually something I saw. I kind of put the pieces together for myself. Like I saw it coming,
right?
Which isn't to say it was dissatisfying. It's just like it felt right to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized I was remembering John Henry from New Frontier what I was remembering more than from Watchmen.
Right.
Yeah, but you could definitely tell that it had to be something that sparked his attention to that, because that's the only thing that it brought about,
Yeah, it's one of those where it's not. I've never seen it mentioned anywhere in an interview, but it's hard to think that idea it doesn't, like you said, it wasn't sparked or didn't come from there, because it definitely. Again, not being ignorant of the before Watchmen stuff, I don't know if there's anything that's in those books, but in the series, the HBO, the Watchmen stuff, that's surely, like, I had that moment of looking through New Frontier and going, oh, now I see where you could have easily, taken the idea and built upon it or extrapolated further out from it.
Yeah.
Right. I still haven't seen it, but that sounds cool though. That's the show. I haven't heard anybody that has said anything bad about it, which stunned me. Because that was another one I was not excited for the Watchmen show at all. But everybody's like, no, it's really good.
It's one of those, it's one of those much. Again, I don't want to crap on anybody's work, but with the before Watchmen stuff, it's kind of like, well, I don't really know if I want. I don't know if I want or need this. But the HBO series was excellent for being something that they, that Moore didn't have anything to do with.
Yeah, right. Or didn't ask for, really.
Yeah, right. Definitely didn't ask for sure.
Interesting.
But hey, real quick, I have to mention this. I didn't know that Cooke did do some Marvel work, in which one came up was Spider-Man's Tangled Web.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are actually the few things I've been able to reread in our ramping up to this. Because I went in and did a dive into his Marvel catalog, just thinking it's something that does get overlooked by his extensive DC work. So yeah, I just happened to reread his 2 issues of Spider-Man's Tangled Web. And Spider-Man's Tangled Web, if you all don't remember the series, or anyone out there doesn't remember, it was a really fun idea. It was a Marvel comic around 2001 to 2002-ish. And it was an anthology series where they would just bring in different creators and then allow those creators to just do kind of offbeat stories that took place roughly in a Spider-Man world. They didn't have to be anything continuity. A lot of fun ideas, a lot of good creators. And Darwyn Cooke wrote and drew for issue number 11. And then he and J-Bone, his longtime collaborator, collaborated on issue number 21. Issue 11 was a Valentine's special issue, and issue 21 was a Christmas special.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask because I forget which one was which.
Yeah, 11. The first one was the Valentine's Day one, and then the second, which is Spider-Man and Vulture, and basically Spider-Man spends most of that issue unconscious in an alley after being beaten up by Vulture, and we follow different characters from the Daily Bugle, mostly in that issue. And then in the Christmas one, it guest stars Fantastic Four and Medusa and Crystal from Inhumans.
Yeah, they're both really fun. I remember, and I remember like chasing down those trades when I found out he had like Spider-Man stories in there, because you don't see a lot of Marvel stuff from him. He didn't really do a whole lot.
6 issues total. His entire Marvel, as far as I can tell right now looking, his entire Marvel catalog consists of 6 issues. And he wrote and drew one of them.
Okay.
And 1.5 because he collaborated with J-Bone on the 2 Tangled Webs, but Spider-Man's Tangled Web 11 is the only one. He's the sole credited writer and artist. And the others are that he did art for X-Force number 124, which was right before it became Ecstatics, so it's that lineup. He did the art on Milligan's script for that issue. It's actually an excellent issue, and I kind of forgot in that comic book, it was kind of sold for the over-the-top idea. It was the first Marvel comic to not abide by the Comics Code Authority.
Okay.
And resulted in them dropping the Comics Code Authority entirely and creating their own rating system. But that was an earlier issue of that run. So it was kind of known for that type of stuff. But in this issue, it's got a lot of heart. And I hadn't read any of the issues in a while. And this one, it's the fun thing about the art is it's a flashback for one of the main characters, Eddie, who goes by You Go Girl in Ecstatics and X-Force.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a flashback to her childhood and situation where we find out she has a daughter. And so the art style goes back and forth between Darwyn Cooke's, usual style. And then a lot of panels are kind of illustrated in the style of a simple children's book. And he just goes back and forth between that. And I really like that one. And then the other things his other Marvel works are teaming up with Milligan again to do a 2-issue Wolverine Dupe miniseries, Dupe being the weird green blob character from Ecstatics.
That one's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And then he did a Scott Lang Ant-Man story in a Marvel double shot that was written by Sean McKeever. He did the art for.
Gotcha.
So that's his entire Marvel catalog, as far as I can tell.
I never read the Wolverine Dupe thing. I've always tried to track that down. I've never been able to find it anywhere. It's one of those, again, it was one of those things like when he passed away, I was really hoping that Marvel was going to do sort of like a Darwyn Cooke collection.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really quite know why that never happened. I mean, you can do it in one book.
Right.
It sounds like, Frank, you brought up the talk that we went to go see him at.
Right.
We should get into this a little bit because I think this really shows how big of a fans we were and are of Darwyn Cooke.
Mm-hmm.
So, Frank, I'll pass it on to you. Do you want to start it off?
Sure.
Yeah.
We had heard that he was going to be doing a talk at the Smithsonian, down at the art gallery in the Smithsonian, and he was going to be talking about I can't remember, was it the first Parker or just the second one?
No, oh right, no, he had 2. The second one had just come out.
Right. And it was one of those things, and it was one of those things where we were gonna go and we had talked about going, and it just started to snow. Ridiculous amounts of snow that morning, right? And it was a Saturday, so we were going to go on that Saturday. We were going to take the metro down and go to the Smithsonian. And we were kind of on the fence. And we're like, all right, we'll just go. And we ended up going. It was you and me and Clifton and one of our other friends. And it turned out there was 30, 40 people there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the city was shut down mostly.
Yeah. Right.
But I remember the snow getting worse as we were out there. It was it's gonna snow. Should we go? And then we were on the train, and it's kind of a little worse than we thought it would be. Right. And as we're out there, smartphones had become a thing, and we're kind of checking the weather. Oh, they're calling it a blizzard now.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah. So we went to go see him in a blizzard, in a bona fide blizzard. That's not an exaggeration. Yes.
Yeah, we had gone in a blizzard to see him give this speech, and it was a great speech where he showed us, what was it, the page and panel transition from the novel to the way he broke it down, panel to page to panel.
No, that was an amazing talk because he got into he had an interesting opinion about where the company or where the industry was going to go. He was a creator that really seemed to embrace digital and was really excited about digital.
Yes.
I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. He was of a mind that it really there shouldn't be so much trepidation or competition between the two, that digital should be much more of a natural progression, and the idea that having books come out on digital for a quarter like they did when they first came out, or 5 cents, 10 cents. But he thought, could you imagine selling 1 million copies of Amazing Spider-Man if everyone able to download it for a quarter? They'd be able to sell 1 million copies or sell the numbers they did when they first came out. And the other thing that I thought was interesting was the idea that he wanted to do. He talked about the idea of having books printed like per copy. So it was kind of like an item of like, if you wanted to have a story beyond the digital and have it held in your hand, you would pay more to get that.
Like a print on demand.
Right. Model.
Yeah.
That was what he's looking at. And the idea that would make it so much easier for like printing costs and all that stuff would be something that would a definite change for the industry.
I remember also, do you remember like the real heartbreaking revelation that he said?
Yes, I do.
Heartbreaking for me was that he had said that he had pitched DC about doing a Wonder Woman book.
Yeah, an all ages Wonder Woman book.
And he was like, I'll do it for a year. I'll give you 12 issues. I'll do it for a year. And his thing was, he's like, he wanted it to be an all ages book. He was like, I want young girls to be excited to pick this up and read it, because he's like, for goodness sake, like who should be reading this?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
And I just remember being so heartbroken. I'm like, oh man, we could like, I'm certain that would have been a definitive run on Wonder Woman. Unquestionably.
Well, sure. I mean, that was one of those things where you could tell how excited he was and how much he wanted to do it. And the idea that DC was like, nah, we'll pass. We're not doing that. It just, you sink in your chair when you think about the fact that they didn't want to do it, and the fact that we'll never get it. That's the heartbreaking thing for me when I think about it.
Yeah. I mean, and it kind of went into a little bit of, because I've heard him in interviews after the fact where he would say like DC's never really offered me a regular title in anything. Right. I've heard him say he was up for that, but he tended to only get approached for like retro Silver Age throwback things. Like there was an interview I saw him in. It was a really cool interview that he talked about a little bit how like Grant Morrison approached him about doing an issue of Multiversity.
Okay.
And it was, of course, like the golden age like issue. And he was like, I'm kind of done doing that stuff. And he was like, I'd love to collaborate with you. Absolutely. Right. He's like, I love your work, but like, just, he's kind of overdoing that stuff, which, oh man. Yeah. Like the number of people of characters he could have touched on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, but that Blizzard trip where we saw him talk is really, really important for me because, as I mentioned from time to time, I do some of my own writing and everything like that. When I met him there, this is a cool thing for me where I got to tell him that his work is kind of the phrase I use is like an inspirational panic button for me.
Okay.
Right. Like anytime I have writer's block or anything, or I'm just not in the mood to write, I'll pick up New Frontier or I'll pick up Selena's Big Score or anything of his. I'll just thumb through it. I won't even read any of it. I'll just thumb through some pages, and then suddenly I get a shot in the arm to want to write.
Yeah.
And I remember like I got to tell him that, and he was like, oh, like he was, I remember like he kind of like brightened up a little bit. Maybe I'm remembering it that way, but I remember he's like, wow, like, oh, that's really cool. Thank you. And I remember him telling me how also shocked he was that they invited him to do a talk at the Smithsonian. He's like, I thought it was a joke. He's like, I thought it was my friends ribbing me when I got the call, when I got the letter about this. But no, it was just really, really cool for me when he passed away to know that at least I had that interaction with him. I got to tell him in some way how much his work meant to me.
Well, that's one thing at the time when he passed away, and it was one of the things where I didn't even know that he was that he was sick or that he was not doing well. I had seen him at Heroes after in the North Carolina show, and I saw him the day of the first day. I went down and I went for the weekend. I was there Friday to Sunday, and I saw him and had a conversation with him, and he was kind of like he was preoccupied, and I'd had an interaction with him in other shows, and like again, we had a nice talk with him the day of we saw him at the Smithsonian, and he just was kind of like he was there, and then the very next day he was gone for the rest of the show, and then no one really had an answer as to where he had gone. And I didn't know if at the time if that had anything to do with him being sick, but every interaction I ever had with him, I enjoyed him, and he was great. to be like to talk to about his work or the industry in general or comics or whatever. It's one of those things where it was cool to be able to talk to him at all when you think about how much of for the short time that he was in comics, how much an influence and how much he was able to accomplish and do.
Yeah. And he was a frequent at Baltimore Comic-Con, which is a big show for us. Like we all love going there. And
right.
And I remember like every year, like let's just go say hey. Not that we had like any relationship with him or any way, but he was just a creator we like to go talk to. And I remember when we would go and we would tell him that we were at the Smithsonian talk, he would always pep up. He would always like, he'd always look up at us for that. Like, and like, oh, wow. Like, yeah.
Sure.
And he was like in the snowstorm, right? And I'm like, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. In the blizzard. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we go though, we should just talk about Parker a little bit because I know that this was a fun project for him because I know he holds those books in very, very high regard, and I believe he had a little bit of a relationship with Richard Stark, which was the pseudonym for Donald Westlake. I may have my history wrong. I don't believe that Westlake actually got to see the first adaptation.
I don't believe he did.
I think he might have passed on before that. But I reread all of these leading up for this.
Okay.
And this is my first time going back looking at them in any deep dive sort of way since they've come out. And what's interesting for me looking at all of them reading quickly is that Parker has like a supporting cast, which I didn't realize. But there are people that are mentioned in The Hunter that you see pop up in The Score, which is the third book, right?
Right.
And there's people that show up in The Outfit that aren't in The Hunter that are also in The Score. And then one of the guys from The Score is in Slayground and everything like that. And it's one of those interesting things that as it was coming out, because it came out, I think, like once every year, it kind of went over your head. At least me, I didn't notice that. I didn't notice that at all.
I don't think I did either.
Yeah. No, and they're brutal books. And I mean, they're obviously, lovingly adapted, and his progression as a storyteller is so cool in these books because he kind of introduces like a new trick in every book, right? Like the first book is got almost no dialogue for the first like 20 pages or so, but it's just this seamless like staging of this guy walking on the bridge and kind of conning his way up and up like into a better position to kind of like get in place to sort of, make his move on what the general thrust of the story is, where he's trying to get back at the guy that, double crossed him on a job and he's trying to get his money back.
Right.
So like there's a beautiful trick in that, like there's a beautiful moment in there. And then I think like to The Outfit, the thing that I remember the most about The Outfit is the way it works is segments. Do you remember those?
Right.
That are done kind of cartoony style, but he would tell you about sort of like how the money laundering at the tracks would work.
Like the different schemes that the organized crime had going on, kind of like little montages.
Yeah. No, I mean, they're just such cool ways of telling the story where there's one page in The Outfit that's like a letter that Parker is sending out to people, and you see the letter and you're reading it, but he's got like the thought boxes, or not thought boxes, but he's got boxes that kind of connect to points in the letter where he's revealing the code, where he's like, okay, this is actually what is meant by this sentence in here.
Right.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is his background as a graphic artist and like in advertising, like I think is really essential for the Parker stuff being as beautiful as it is. Like, I mean, he captures the time so well. And there's like these cool, not a ton of attention to them, but there's like a cool design aesthetic to it, where like the watches on there, are like Timex watches from the 60s, and the cars and sort of the billboards and signs that are in the background and everything. And rereading them, it was one of those things like I really want somebody to option Parker as a TV series.
Yeah.
Like
I can see that. Sure.
Yeah. Like if Amazon, gave it the Miss Maisel like treatment, where like it kind of had like that look and feel to it. Yeah.
You mean like do it like a period piece?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because
Yeah, I could
like I
definitely see
said,
that.
when I saw that he had a supporting cast, I'm like, okay, there's room for this.
Mhm.
You know. Yeah. So yeah. So unfortunately, like there was one book that was solicited before he passed away. I remember Image put out a group of solicitations for a lot of books. Like I remember Moonshine by Azzarello was on there, and The Goddamned by Jason Aaron was on there as well. But he was doing a book called Revengeance.
Okay.
You remember? And it was supposed to be like a 3-issue um, kind of a crime caper noir, but not taking itself seriously. Also at the same
Right.
time kind of book. And I
Mhm.
you know, I remember this was solicited, and we'll put sort of the banner image that was released with this on our website too, if you guys want to check it out. It was really neat. I remember being really excited, but I think this is what he was working on when he passed on. But I did also come across an interview where he was talking about doing a digital book. And I had never heard that. We'll put this interview up too. This is what I found really intriguing. He was kind of musing about what the format could do. Where he was like, if anybody tells stories visually, should be excited for digital, because they were looking at the way that people use tablets, and he was looking at sort of like how they could utilize almost like pop-up ad technology to reveal information, and how people swipe to be. He just saw it as like as a potential for a more immersive experience to get them to play around with the work itself beyond further than just kind of like doing their own sense of time when they're reading the panel to panel, like what happens when you're reading comics. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting interview too. So, all right. So as our cooldown then, so what's a character that Darwyn never got a chance to work on that we would like to see him work on, or we would have loved to have seen him work on?
I will definitely, for me, it was like we talked about in Going to See Him in the Smithsonian, the idea that he never got a chance to do that Wonder Woman book. Even done that one, or done a continuation of the one that we see in New Frontier, I would have loved to have seen him handle Wonder Woman, see what he would have done with her. Because, you know, the way she's portrayed in New Frontier especially, you know, and even in the Gloria Steinem part of the one with her and Black Canary that's in the addition to New Frontier, the one shot. I thought even that he handles her really well. It would have been cool to see her, even if he did her modern day, or put her in the 70s or whatever. It still would have been cool to see Darwyn get to to work on that character. I thought would have been great.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, one that I thought of that I would have liked to have seen, it came from a time when I was at a convention, I believe it was Baltimore, and talking with a couple other people, and had the chance to talk to DC editor Mark Chiarello, who was the editor responsible for Solo. He was also the editor responsible for the Wednesday Comics project, which was a great, like, I love that whole Wednesday Comics series where, for people who don't know, DC basically put out like a whole comic section of comics in the old like full sheet newspaper style, but folded up down to a comic book size to sell on the rack. And it was just a whole bunch of one-page stories in each issue of the comic, and then they did a big collection of it in almost the full newspaper size, with some great art, some great creators. And the conversation at the convention with Chiarello and some other convention goers was that if they were to ever do a Wednesday Comics 2, that it would be great to see Darwyn Cooke do an Enemy Ace comic strip.
That'd be good.
And that's what I would have loved to have seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, to be quite honest, I'd like to see him do a Marvel character. I would love to see him do like Hawkeye or even Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Just the whole, especially how Hawkeye is depicted now. I would love to see it through Darwyn's eyes, as to, him moving back and forth between the gritty hero, or even, I'll even put as far as, I like to see him do that or Green Arrow. Just that whole
Oh,
Yeah,
he would have a good Green Arrow. Yeah.
every man
Yeah.
being stepping up more and just not stopping until it gets done type of imagery that he did in
Right.
Stark's books, just to have that type of person too. I think he shines best when he uses the everyman that could do the unbelievable or the unstoppable,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm with you too. I would put a Marvel character on mine. I would say Cap. I would love to see Cap.
Yeah, Cap would be nice too.
But really though, what I want to do rather than talk about a character, I want to recommend a movie that actually he had nothing to do with, but actually feels very much like him. And that was Bad Times at the El Royale, which is a 2018 movie that was written and directed by Drew Goddard. And like it feels so much like a Darwyn piece. It's got like 1960s aesthetic. It's kind of a dark like crime thing. The characters all kind of feel like characters he would write, and the scenes kind of have like different colors to them. So if you're a fan of his work and you want to see what I think would be the closest thing to like a work of his on film, check out Bad Times at the El Royale. With that, I will say check out letmeknowhowitis.com, because we're going to post a lot of notes for this episode, a lot of art, and some of the interview clips that we talked about seeing him in and things of that nature. And also, don't forget to follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, everybody. But I want to end on Darwyn. If somehow you can hear this, we fans just want you to know that there's a huge hole in the comic industry now that your voice is missing. Your work has touched this podcaster personally, and I know it has many, many others as well. We'll always cherish your incredible work and all the wonderful memories. And whatever waits us in this life, wherever we go, I just hope that it has paper and ink. So we miss you greatly. Thanks, Darwyn.